Hello, and warm welcome to Holy Trinity Church in Maisons-Laffitte on this Remembrance Sunday, 78 years after the end of World War II in Europe and 105 years from this November 11th since the end of the Great War in 1918. Well, on this weekend of November 11th and today, Remembrance Sunday, we pause to remember. We who live, who enjoy peace and freedom, we still our souls to remember. We take this time to recognize that the relative stability of nations in Europe, the prosperity and comfort which have flourished here since 1945, well, it all came at a great cost. When I am at Holy Trinity and I can see commemorative plaques on the walls of the church, it has names on it of people I did not know, could not have known, yet to whom I must acknowledge that I personally owe a debt of gratitude. To any veterans of any wars here listening today, I thank you. It doesn't matter how long ago these wars were. These two great wars were still the defining events of the Europe that we know today, if this is where we live. Perhaps there are some people who did know these men or who know other soldiers, families, civilians who sacrificed and who have lived in streets filled with war, where no home is safe, where people, if they can come to church, sit in seats uttering prayers for their loved ones, perhaps for themselves, engaged in either active or passive resistance to an invading, controlling, occupying force. Perhaps some listening today are thinking of a specific person or persons who perhaps have not returned, or who have returned from a war but since passed on. It is likely that every person sitting here when we are in church or listening online has some specific link to someone who has served their country, either in the military or a civil function, past or present conflicts, whether in Europe or in the world around us. I think of my grandfather, for example, who served from 1941 to 1946. He was sent to lead and train troops in China. He did come home, but then died relatively young, well, at my age. We all know that the price paid by those who served is not always immediately visible. Veterans of today's wars speak more freely of the trauma they bring home. But even now, it is so costly to express that seeming impossibility of living in a world which hasn't experienced the body-pounding percussion sounds of mortars and missiles, the stench of death and fighting bodies, or the terrible, soul-destroying choices which arise and must be made on the battlefield. But here's the thing. There's nothing notable or exceptional about my grandfather's story in the sense that his story was not rare, just as there's nothing rare about the stories of the men commemorated on the walls of Holy Trinity. Numbers are still debated, but let's be reminded of the scale of that conflict. Perhaps 75 million people lost their lives in World War II, 20 million in World War II. That's military personnel and civilians combined, because war has always created horrific civilian casualties. Those numbers include something like 20 million civilian deaths. Can we fathom this? We're seeing on our screens at the moment that civilian casualties are not a thing of the past. And even this horror pales in comparison to the mainly unreported Tigray conflict in Ethiopia, which the EU estimated last year was costing perhaps as many as 900 civilian lives every day from both directly from the war or starvation. They say the war in Ethiopia resulted in more battle-related deaths in 2022 than the wars in Ukraine, Yemen, Myanmar, Nigeria, Somalia, Mali, and Burkina Faso combined. And that doesn't even include the associated atrocities that are perpetrated. Liberty, freedom, peace, they always come at a terrible price. On Remembrance Sunday, we honor each and every individual who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect freedoms and values we hold dear. And it is appropriate to do so in church. I may not be standing in one, but I will be going to one later. Why is it appropriate for us to do so in church? Well, although there is nothing exceptional about loss of life or even a lifetime of some form of living death, every single life is of unique and inestimable value to God. That is God's appraisal. Every human life of infinite value. And secondly, and this is linked to the first, let us remember that when God looked at humanity in our war-torn and hopeless state of pain and loss, he was not indifferent. In fact, God made the most costly strategic move of all. He sent his own son to the front lines in order to secure an eternal place of peace for all of us. God is the author of all reconciliation. And our God knows and feels deeply, viscerally, both the brokenheartedness of loss to war, every war, and the determination which is required in order to make the sacrifice which will secure peace. He is both general and soldier, admiral and sailor. And then finally, when Jesus said, "Greater love hath no person than to lay down their life for another," that was not an abstract concept, a soundbite with no substance. That was his personal war plan, and he was the one who would sacrifice himself. Laying down one's life for the sake of another is a profoundly Christian act. But just as Jesus' disciples 2,000 years ago did not understand that plan, so today we here may not understand why Jesus seems to have so delayed his return and the final eradication of all war. We have that marvelous promise, don't we, of a new heaven and a new earth where God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things will have passed away. Our only question some days is, when? How much longer? This is the question that the martyrs ask in Revelations, and God gives the incredibly difficult but strategic long-term answer that the general must give. Just a bit longer, so that as many may enter heaven as possible. The long-term view can be so challenging, but it is also what gives us hope. As we conclude, perhaps we can read what was in the Gospel readings of the lectionary today in Matthew 23, the parable of the young women waiting the arrival of the bridegroom and the ultimate celebration of unity in love. And love. In case we've missed it, the bridegroom is Jesus. Half of these young women had been waiting in hope and so had spent their time getting ready. But half of them had fallen into complacency with no real expectation that he would come. So they squandered their time. Hope is what made a difference to how they lived. Jesus reminds us we can choose hopeful expectation. And one of the characteristics of the people who are expecting Jesus' return is that we choose love. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. So let us remember today, life is short for all of us, even when we are not deprived of any of our years in an untimely manner. May the certainty of Jesus' victory over death and our sure hope of his return to us to take us home make all the difference to all our remembrances today. Amen.